All right, so we're back for another deep dive, and today things are getting interesting. We're going to be talking about Nostr. And you guys have sent in a ton of articles and notes on this, and it seems like there's a lot to unpack here. One of the things that really stood out to me right off the bat was this idea that Nostr is built for truly free speech, even content that its creator might disagree with. So we're going to deep dive into what that actually means for building an inclusive online space, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point to start with. I think before we even get into the specifics of Nostr, and it's worth taking a step back and thinking about what decentralized social media even means.
Yeah.
Because it really is a fundamental shift from platforms like Facebook or, X, formerly known as Twitter,
Yes.
right? That we're all used to.
Yeah, okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What makes decentralized platforms so fundamentally different?
Well, I think the core difference lies in who holds the power, right? So on platforms like Facebook, a single company controls everything. The rules, the algorithms, the content that's allowed. They can censor users or even ban them entirely if they choose. But with Nostr, there's no single entity calling the shots. It's designed so that no one person or organization can dictate what content is allowed.
Sure.
Or control how the network operates.
So instead of having a central authority, like a company or a government, deciding what we can and can't see, the power is distributed among the users themselves. That's a pretty radical departure from what we're used to.
It really is. And this decentralized structure has profound implications for how content is shared and consumed, right?
Yeah.
Like think about your typical social media feed for a moment. It's controlled by algorithms that are designed to keep you engaged, often by prioritizing the most, attention-grabbing content,
Yeah.
even if it's divisive or
Now,
outrageous.
have you ever felt like you're being fed more and more extreme content online?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
This is why.
Yeah, and that's the algorithm at work, right? Prioritizing engagement above all else. But Nostr flips the script on that. Instead of algorithms, it relies on a web of trust model. Basically, you choose who you want to follow. And content is displayed chronologically without any algorithmic manipulation. So instead of a platform deciding what you see, you're curating your own experience by choosing the voices and perspectives that you trust.
So it almost sounds like a return to the early days of the internet, where it was more about connecting with individuals that you chose rather than being fed content by some faceless algorithm.
That's a great analogy. And that shift in who holds the power, from a platform to individuals, brings us back to this concept of trust. Think about it. On traditional social media, we're essentially placing our trust in a company to filter the information we see. But with Nostr's web of trust model, that trust is distributed. We're choosing to trust individuals and their recommendations.
That's really interesting. It makes you think about the philosophical implications of where we place our trust online. So how does this web of trust actually work in practice? Is it just a matter of following people you like?
Well, it goes deeper than that. You're not just following people, you're essentially creating a network of trusted sources. And because Nostr is built on open protocols, anyone can develop tools to manage and visualize these networks of trust.
So you could have tools that help you see who the most trusted voices are within your network, or even analyze the different perspectives that are being shared. That adds a whole new layer of transparency and control that we just don't have on traditional social media.
Exactly, and this ties into another key aspect of Nostr that's worth mentioning, its technical underpinnings. So unlike traditional social media platforms, which are typically closed systems, Nostr is built on open protocols, kind of like the foundation of the internet itself. This means that anyone can build applications on top of Nostr, just like developers can build websites on top of the internet protocols.
So instead of being limited to a single company's platform,
Yeah.
you have this whole ecosystem of different applications that can connect to the Nostr network, each with its own unique features and focus. That sounds like it could lead to a lot of innovation and experimentation.
Absolutely, and that brings us to another crucial difference between Nostr and traditional social media. It's resistance to censorship, because there is no central authority. It's virtually impossible for anyone to shut down the entire network or dictate what content is allowed.
That's a powerful idea, especially in a world where we're seeing more and more attempts to control the flow of information online. But I'm sure some listeners are thinking, okay, that all sounds great in theory. But what about the downsides? If there's no central authority to moderate content, how do you prevent the spread of hate speech or harmful content? It's a legitimate concern.
It absolutely is, and it's something that the Nostr article addresses directly. They acknowledge the potential for harmful content, but they argue that Nostr's approach might actually be more effective in the long run.
More effective? How so?
Well, think about it. Right now, we rely on these massive social media companies to police content. but they're constantly playing catch-up, and they often make mistakes or overreach in their attempts to moderate. Nostr flips that model by giving users more control and responsibility.
So instead of relying on a single company to decide what's acceptable, the power shifts back to the users themselves. But is that realistic? Can we really expect everyday users to moderate content effectively? I mean, won't that just lead to chaos?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's something that we'll dive into a little bit deeper in the next part of our deep dive. But before we do, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine a world where you have the tools to curate your own online experience, where you can choose the voices and perspectives that you trust, and where you have more control over the information that you consume. That's the potential that Nostr offers, and it's a potential that's worth exploring, even with all of its complexities and challenges.
I like that. Yeah, you've definitely given us a lot to think about here. It sounds like Nostr is asking us to rethink our relationship with social media entirely, like from who we trust to how we even engage with information online. But I have to admit, this idea of users moderating content themselves feels a bit daunting. Is it even possible to create a healthy online environment without some form of centralized control?
Well, it's a valid concern, and it goes right to the heart of the whole debate about free speech and online platforms.
Mhm.
But the Nuss article argues that Nostr's decentralized model can actually lead to more effective moderation, just in a way that's very different from what we're used to.
Okay, so how would moderation even work in a decentralized system like Nostr? I'm picturing a free-for-all where anything goes.
Well, it's not quite a free-for-all,
Yeah.
but it does require a bit of a shift in mindset. Instead of relying on a single platform to kind of filter out the harmful content, Nostr empowers users to curate their own experience. Remember that web of trust model we talked about?
Yeah.
That plays a crucial role here.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're essentially choosing to see content from people and communities that you trust. And you can block or filter out content from those that you don't. It's like building your own personalized filter bubble in a way.
It's more nuanced than a traditional filter
Yeah.
bubble, though, because you're not just filtering based on your own preferences, you're leveraging the collective wisdom of your trusted network. It's like having a group of friends help you curate your online experience, filtering out the noise and highlighting the content that's most valuable to you.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it. But even with this web of trust, wouldn't there still be bad actors trying to spread harmful content? Like, how do you prevent that from reaching a wider audience?
Well, that's where the open source nature of Nostr really comes into play, because anyone can build tools and applications on top of the protocol. There's a lot of potential for innovation in content moderation. You could have apps, for example, that use machine learning to identify and flag potentially harmful content, or tools that help users quickly and easily report abuse.
So instead of a top-down approach where a single company dictates the rules, you have this more bottom-up system where developers and users can collaborate to create solutions that meet the specific needs of the community.
Exactly. And this open approach allows for a lot more flexibility and responsiveness than traditional social media platforms. It also means that moderation tools can evolve over time, adapting to new challenges and incorporating feedback from users.
It sounds like this decentralized model is asking us to be more active and engaged participants in shaping the online environment. We're not just passive consumers of content anymore. We're becoming curators, moderators, and even developers shaping the platforms we use.
Exactly. And that's a pretty significant shift in how we think about online interaction. It's moving away from this idea of a platform as a walled garden, controlled by a single entity, and towards a more open and collaborative ecosystem where users have more agency and responsibility.
It's a bold vision, that's for sure. But it's also a bit scary, to be honest. I mean, can we really trust users to handle such important tasks like content moderation? Don't we need some level of expert oversight to ensure things don't spiral out of control?
It's certainly a challenge, and there will undoubtedly be bumps along the way. But the Nose article makes a pretty compelling argument that user-led moderation, when done right, can actually be more effective and less prone to bias than traditional methods.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about how this user-led moderation could actually work in practice and why it might be more effective.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to remember that user-led moderation doesn't mean that everyone is on their own, right? There are still community standards and norms that kind of guide behavior, and there are tools and mechanisms for reporting abuse. The difference is that these standards and tools are developed and enforced by the community itself, rather than by a single authority.
So it's like a form of self-governance where the community sets the rules and holds each other accountable. But how do you ensure that these community-driven systems are fair and unbiased? Isn't there a risk that powerful groups could hijack the system and silence dissenting voices?
That's a valid concern, and it's something that any decentralized system needs to address. I think the beauty of Nostr's open and modular design is that it allows for multiple approaches to moderation. For example, you could have different communities or relays with their own specific moderation policies.
So it's like having different neighborhoods within a city, each with its own set of rules and norms. But everyone still abides by the overarching laws of the city. That way you could have communities that are more tightly moderated, while others might be more open and freewheeling.
Exactly, and this allows for a much greater diversity of perspectives and approaches to moderation than you would see on a traditional platform. It also means that if you disagree with the moderation policies of one community, you can always choose to join or create another one that better aligns with your values.
This idea of choice and user agency seems to be a recurring theme in Nostr's design philosophy.
It absolutely is, and it's a fundamental shift from the one-size-fits-all approach of traditional social media platforms. Instead of being forced to conform to a single set of rules, Nostr empowers users to shape their own online experience, choosing the communities they want to be part of, and the moderation policies they want to abide by.
But with all this talk of user control and choice, I can't help but wonder about the practical implications of all of this. I mean, is it realistic to expect everyday users to navigate all these different communities and moderation policies? Won't it just become too complicated and overwhelming for the average person?
That's a legitimate concern, and it's something that Nostr developers are actively working to address. They're creating tools and interfaces that make it easier for users to manage their online experience, discover new communities, and understand different moderation policies.
So it's not just about throwing users into the deep end and expecting them to figure it all out on their own. There's a recognition that user-friendly tools and clear guidance are essential for making this decentralized model work in practice.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And the key here is to strike a balance between giving users control and providing enough support to make that control manageable. It's about empowering users without overwhelming them.
That makes a lot of sense. So as we kind of delve deeper into this world of Nostr, one thing that's becoming clear to me is that it's not just about the technology itself. It's about a fundamental shift in our relationship with social media and how we interact online. It's about moving away from this model where we're passive consumers of content curated by algorithms and towards a model where we're active participants, curators, and even creators of our own online experience.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Mhm.
It's a shift from centralized control to distributed power, from algorithmic curation to human connection, from passive consumption to active participation. And as with any paradigm shift, there will be challenges, growing pains, and perhaps even some failures along the way.
But even with these challenges, there's something incredibly exciting about the potential of Nostr. It's kind of a glimpse into a future where online interaction is more authentic, more meaningful, and more aligned with our values. But before we get too carried away with these idealistic visions of the future, let's take a step back and consider the real-world implications of Nostr's decentralized model. Because as we've seen, this shift in power and control raises some important questions about accountability, fairness, and even the very nature of online communities.
Absolutely. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore these questions in more depth, examining the potential benefits and risks of Nostr's approach, and consider what it might mean for the future of online interaction.
So, welcome back to the deep dive. We've been having such a fascinating conversation about Nostr, and I have to say, you've brought up some thought-provoking points. This whole idea of decentralization could really shake things up online, from how communities work to content moderation, and even the whole concept of trust. But let's be real for a sec. Is this all just some utopian dream? Can Nostr actually pull this off?
Well, that's the big question, right? I mean, nobody can say for sure just yet. Nostr is still pretty young. It's like the Wild West out there, lots of experimentation, lots of unknowns.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about, like, exploring what's possible.
Exactly. But the Nostr article does point to some actual real-world examples of how people are using Nostr right now, and I think that can give us a peek into its potential.
Okay, let's get into those examples then. How are people actually using Nostr today?
Well, the most obvious one is, as a social network, there are already a bunch of Nostr apps out there that act a lot like Twitter or Mastodon, where users can share messages, follow each other, and have conversations.
So it's like a decentralized alternative to the big platforms we're all familiar with.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just replicating those existing platforms, right? Because Nostr is so flexible and open, developers are building all sorts of innovative stuff that goes way beyond traditional social networking.
That's what I find so cool about all of this. It's not just building another Twitter. It's about a whole new ecosystem of tools and apps that can work together in ways we haven't even thought of yet. What are some of the more unconventional things people are doing with it?
Well, one interesting example is using it for micropayments. Nostr runs on this kind of blockchain-like tech, so you can actually send tiny bits of cryptocurrency through the network.
Wait, hold on. Blockchain. I thought we were talking about social media, not crypto.
It's all connected. Remember how we said Nostr is built on these open protocols?
Mm.
Well, those protocols also make it possible to transfer value, which opens up a ton of possibilities.
Okay, break this down for me like I'm 5. How do these micropayments work? Why would I even want to use them?
Imagine you're reading this amazing article online, and you want to show the author some love, right? With Nostr, you could send them a few cents directly, no middleman, no crazy transaction fees.
Oh, so like a virtual tip jar. That's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
It could be huge for content creators who are struggling to, actually make money from their work on the big platforms.
Exactly. And that's just one example of how Nostr's decentralized design can give power back to individuals and create new economic models.
This is making me think back to that point we made about trust. On the traditional platforms, we're basically trusting these giant companies with our data, our money, even our online identities. But Nostr is saying, hey, rethink who you trust and how you build those trust relationships online.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what makes Nostr so potentially revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about the tech. It's about shifting power, rethinking trust, and giving people more control over their online lives.
But let's be real, this is a massive undertaking. Can Nostr actually deliver on all of this? What are some of the real-world challenges they'll need to overcome?
One of the biggest is user adoption, as you mentioned. People get comfortable with what they know. It's tough to get them to switch from the platforms they're used to, even if those platforms are, not perfect.
Especially when those platforms have billions of users and billions of dollars going into making them as addictive as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Nostr's going up against some serious competition. To win, it needs to offer something truly compelling, something that's not just better in theory, but actually better to use. That means making user-friendly apps, building a strong community, and showing real-world value beyond the hype.
And also tackling those concerns about content moderation, right? Making sure the platform doesn't turn into a breeding ground for, all the bad stuff.
Absolutely. That's where developing strong moderation tools and those community-driven approaches are going to be essential.
So it sounds like Nostr's still a work in progress, but there's a lot of passion and energy pushing it forward.
Definitely. And that's what makes it so exciting, right? And it feels like we're on the edge of something truly new, something that could completely change how we connect and communicate online.
It's a bold experiment, for sure. And like any experiment, there's no guarantee it'll work out. But even if Nostr doesn't become the next big thing, it's already gotten us thinking about some important questions about how tech shapes our lives, the power dynamics online, and what we want our online communities to be like.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what makes our deep dive today so valuable. It's not just about learning about some new tech. It's about opening our minds, questioning our assumptions, and figuring out what kind of online world we want to create for ourselves and for everyone coming after us.
That's an amazing thought to leave our listeners with. As we wrap up this deep dive into Nostr, I think it's safe to say this conversation is far from over. The future of how we interact online is still being written, and it's up to all of us to decide what part we want to play in shaping it. Thanks for joining us.